Hello, I'm Justin the Canadian Tuxedo. Welcome to the channel. Today we'll be talking about the new album by Wallows entitled Tell Me That It's Over. This is Wallows' second studio album and is produced by Ariel Ruckscheid, who's worked with Haim, Adele, U2. He seems to help the band realize the sounds that they want to make, kind of like George Martin was to the Beatles. You can really hear the touchstones of his production work throughout the album. This is an incredibly ambitious album blending elements of indie rock, pop, 80s synth pop, lo-fi, chamber pop.
Shrimp soup, shrimp stew, shrimp salad.
It sees the band flexing its muscles and pushing the boundaries of their sound. There are many sonic textures throughout the album with 80s synths, feedback guitars, acoustic guitars, harmonica, strings. However, I do feel that the vast diversity within the album makes it a little bit disjointed. There are a lot of tape effects, distortion, and aggressive compression, which at times adds depth and dynamics, but sometimes can be a little bit overcooked. Luckily though, the songwriting and overall production makes up for these minor shortcomings. Vocals are divided between Dylan Minnette and Braden Lemasters. Their voices complement and play off each other really nicely throughout the album, and the band's performances are solid and tight without being mechanical. I kind of love that there's some flub notes and imperfections in the timing. It makes it feel more real. And I love that when the band comes to a new verse or chorus, they always seem to change the way it is presented to you, or they change the chords to change the context. Hard to Believe opens the album with Dylan's double-tracked vocals coming in over some really nice string chords before you're dropped into a lush haze of spiraling synths and bass, and then into like a laid-back verse before hitting a big chorus with blown-out synths and drums and loud guitars. The bridge adds a heavy guitar lead that seems to follow the vocal melody. Then we get this cool part where like the vocals are carrying over this washed-out guitar feedback. And then there's this whistling melody that comes in, and there's some very like cinematic strings. The end of the track is both pretty and a little bit chaotic. This track sets up the album nicely. It feels like the beginning of a movie. It's very cool. We then jump into the single I Don't Want to Talk. This song makes me think of early Strokes, but with some Vampire Weekend influence. The song is very bouncy and there's a melodic hook right off the top. There's a tight drum sound with some round bass and acoustic guitars and synths. The vocal has this nice interesting sound reminiscent of like old soul records or Motown, with some of the distortion of Julian Casablancas' vocals. The chorus, like many on this album, is very hummable and hooky as hell. There's some organ pad parts that really give the song some emotional depth. The song is very dancey. In the bridge, there's this really cool drum part where it sounds like the drums kind of fall apart, but like on purpose, and then they glitch out before the song builds back up and blowing up with a big sputtering echo vocal. The song has so much energy, but there's just something kind of bittersweet about it as well. It's a solid single and probably one of the best tracks on the album for sure. Next we have Especially You, which is another single off this album. This song has a very summery, cool, laid-back groove to it. The drums sound kind of like hip-hop from the 80s. Some of the production on this makes me think of the poppier elements of like Modest Mouse. There's a great pocket between the bass and the drums. The vocal melody is infectious, and there are some pretty melodic parts. And at one point, it sounds like there's some like Grandmaster Flash synths, like out of The Message. The chorus on this song is insanely catchy. It's fantastic, and I love all the weird tape loop and effects all over it. This song is pure indie pop bliss. This is followed up by At the End of the Day, which sees the band mixing its sounds with lo-fi and 80s synth pop. There's some like vintage synths and drum machines and echoey acoustic guitar parts and very spacious vocal parts. The song has a very cool structure and almost sounds like there's two different choruses back to back. And I like that when the band uses synths from the 80s, they don't use them kind of like in a nostalgic sort of way. They kind of use it more authentically. When the drums kick in, the song builds in emotion and depth, and I love Braden's vocals. They're breezy, but kind of have this longing in them, and he has a really nice falsetto. Then we sink into the bridge, which is really pretty. Then they take elements from the bridge and the chorus, and then they kind of smoosh them in together into like one super chorus. I like that this song feels both dreamy and soothing, but also kind of melancholic. On the track Marvelous, the band comes in sounding a bit like Vampire Weekend, with these ambient sounds and a bouncy verse. There's some cool bass and keyboards and hand claps and tambourines. We dive right into the chorus and back into the second verse in under a minute. It's crazy. The second verse expands heavily from the first, with like a Motown groove and arrangement, and it sounds like there's like a string mellotron added in here too. When we get to the bridge, there's this screeching guitar part before building into the third verse with parts of the first two, and then adding organ and horns. Then we get the last chorus, which takes elements again from other parts of the track. This song is such a great pop song, and it's a really good midpoint closer for the album. In a washed haze of synth and guitars, Permanent Price comes in with these laid-back drums, and then there's this distorted vocal hook that comes in and a cool lead guitar part that just plays off the vocal really nicely. It kind of almost sounds like it's out of a cartoon. It's quite interesting and unique. And then there's this kind of like odd 60s chamber reverb, like think on like old Motown records, that's on top of the vocals. And on this song, the band uses a lot of really colorful chords. It's very 60s-like. It's classic pop songwriting, and the chorus of the song is just dreamy and longing, and I love the vocals on this. It's not necessarily the most technical, but you really get the sense of the depth of the emotion here, and it's perfect. There are also harmonica, or I don't know if it's harmonica or melodica, and some strings in the chorus. Towards the end of the song, they do this really cool effect where they do this loud, quiet, loud dynamic. And then they finish off the song by making a new section that also combines melodic elements of the intro and the chorus and the verse. And then they add these really pretty bell-like sounds on top. It's a gorgeous track. The next track, Missing Out, has some really cool lo-fi guitars at the start. It sounds like it might have been recorded on like a phone. Then Braden's vocal comes in with like a simple but very emotive verse. There's some pretty guitar parts and piano. And then the drum and bass set a really nice pocket here too. The drums have this like small but roomy sound to it. When the chorus kicks in, it's like really hard. Like it caught me off guard. It kind of sounds like Pinkerton era Weezer. There's some big guitars and quirky lead guitar bits. And the drums have this like overcompressed, blown out sound to them. And in this case, I kind of feel it gets pushed a little too hard and it detracts from the chorus having groove.
No! You threw off my groove!
Before the next verse kicks in, we get this odd distorted auto-tune vocal part that sounds kind of like out of a Kanye West album, like 808s and Heartbreaks. The next verse adds bells and some bongos and a second vocal. The bridge breaks down and settles into a building sing-along bit. Kind of takes an interesting turn, because rather than getting bigger, the band just kind of jams out on like this acoustic vibe. And then there's this really neat thing where they add this like fluttering saxophone. This feels a bit like Vampire Weekend or like Jack Antonoff would do with the Bleachers. On the song Hurts Me, we come in tumbling on these 80s drum machine tom-toms. There are many synth parts layered from leads to bumping synth chords to a funky slap bass part. The verse is really groovy. It's got like this synth pop kind of vibe going on. The pre-chorus kind of slows right down and has this really soft emotive vocal. And again, we get really, really nice falsetto from Braden. And then we drop right into the chorus with this call and response vocal between the two vocalists. It's really infectious. The next verse kind of cools off, but we get these reverse swelling parts, and this come down just makes the next chorus hit even harder before we get a building bridge, and then we get like a clap along chorus. And then the band just starts layering on top of really cool vocal ad-libs and synths. The song kind of feels a little bit out of place on the track listing. It's way more synth-poppy than the rest of the record. But I feel like it gets a pass because it's a total banger. And it's so damn catchy. On the song That's What I Get, we open with a dampered piano. It kind of reminded me of some of the piano parts on Taylor Swift's album Folklore. There's this breezy, affected vocal from Braden that comes in, and then some string parts come in, and they're spaced out so they jump out from different sides of the mix. In the pre-chorus, it opens right up with some soft, lush, cavernous vocals before reeling it right back in with the chorus. The drums have this like galloping kind of groove. And there's some funky bass and really hooky vocal melodies. In the second verse, the band punctuates different beats with these big dynamic shots. Both the pre-chorus and the chorus get expanded. Then we get this building cinematic bridge that takes elements from all the previous sections and then just kind of throws them all together before we get this dreamy chorus refrain that piles affected bits and pieces and ad-libs. The song kind of sounds like you'd end a movie with it, with like the big boombox moment in like Say Anything. The album closes with Guitar Romantic Search Adventure. That's a crazy title. With its slow and dreaming vocal and acoustic guitar and big airy synth pads, a little bit of piano in there too. And then there's this big crescendo that leads into a melancholic instrumental break, full of 80 synths and big spacious drums. Kind of makes me think of the big melodic moments on some Pink Floyd records. There's lo-fi guitar and vocal that sounds like it's on some garbled old cassette tape before launching back into the instrumental section. Then they add some hushed vocals over top of the groove, and it's this like cool way to close out the album. It's very cinematic. And then we ride off into the sunset with some acoustic guitar and piano. This is a really great album, and it shows what the band is capable of. The songwriting is classic in its style, but modern in its execution. It's very ambitious, and I really have to applaud them for that. Occasionally, that ambition kind of gets the best of them, but it doesn't make the record suffer for it. Admittedly, this album sounds familiar. I get a lot of vibes from like indie rock that was prevalent in the early 2000s. That being said, I really enjoyed the album, and that's really the point, isn't it? I'm gonna give this album 4 denim jackets out of 5. I look forward to seeing what Wallows have in store next, and if you're looking for a fun and colorful indie album, look no further. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, like, subscribe, and hit me in the comments with what you think I should review next. Stay weird, my friends, and I'll catch you on the B-side.